they will be very almost premature in calling it the end of the crisis and now cheering themselves against into the next bubble. So I don't think there is any hope from newspapers. I think that what you said, Steve, right at the beginning is we need new business models and new subsidy models. That's true, but I think it's too late to save the newspaper. I think the game is now to save financial journalism. That's another story, and we might have to look at different models. But I see financial journalism. If I look at some of the bloggers, some of the independent services, they do provide financial journalism. They actually also indirectly subsidize. If you have a tenured professor writing from his office at Harvard a blog, then he is in a sense subsidized because he's got a secure income and he uses the blog to get his ideas across, and he often gets better information, more and actually more investigative information sometimes than journalists who have no clue of the story. And you find some dedicated bloggers in the financial sector. There's a whole number of really good blogs. I mean, people have been taking a very critical view. For example, I mean, I don't want to give any advertisements here, but a blog like Calculated Risk, I don't know whether you heard about it, was by far the most reliable source of the U.S. mortgage market. During the crisis, during the bubble, and in the aftermath. Now, these guys were not journalists, but these guys came from inside the industry. They were really investigative. They really got stuff that none of the journalists, reached. They had an understanding. They were critical. I mean, they had all these various things that we are asking for from good financial journalism. And they did it as you said, the journalistic entrepreneur. I think that's to my mind more of the future of journalism than saving some defunct newspaper.
Interesting. Go ahead with this.
Yeah, I was just going to say. I mean, I am a blogger, so I don't want to knock them. I want to say a couple things. I think we all, and I'm going to disagree with Wolfgang here entirely, but not entirely, but. I think we do have to come to terms with the limitations of blogging. There's financial limitations, and you're talking about people coming out of J school with a variety of skill sets. You know what? I think it's actually narrower than you think. I mean, blogging is a very, very specific function, and there's appropriate lengths. There's again, and it's mostly sort of, it's a very flexible medium in the sense you can write forever, but there's severe, I think we should acknowledge there's severe limitations attached, real practical ones. Here's the thing. These newspapers that we are really saying goodbye to, and I agree, but we have to remember, these were large industrial era organizations that employed hundreds and hundreds of reporters. LA Times had 1,300 people covering that region. The New York Times says about that now. Wall Street Journal has 700 people. Bloomberg has 2,300 people. You know how many people they have in London? 170. They have 135 bureaus. Anyway, my point only is this: is that and I'm all for, as a blogger, I'm all for blogs, but the real thing that we have to worry about as journalists is the fact gathering function. I mean, it is really time intensive. That's where the rubber hits the road for me. The time and it takes to develop sources and schmooze them and fly across the country to take them to dinner and all the stuff I used to do at the Journal that were ridiculously expensive. It's the most inefficient thing you could possibly imagine being in a newsroom. And I'm hopeful about blogs, and I agree Calculated Risk is good, and Naked Capitalism, and all of them, they're really welcome voices, but I do worry about the fact gathering thing, because that's where sort of the debate begins.
I'm not defending blogs as the only thing. I don't think blogs are the only thing. What I think is we're getting a split. I mean, it's interesting, Financial Times actually is the one newspaper that isn't losing circulation at the moment. It was able to double its cover price and still gain it. I think we're getting a split between the specialist publications, who also have the columnists, the detailed work, and this other level of, on-the-ground investigation. The middle is the bit that's being squeezed out at the moment, the sort of ordinary thing. And I think that's, the problem for the future. I think we still will have the specialist publications, and I think we still will have the people at the bottom. What we're going to possibly lose is the middle.
Damien wants to come in here. I'm going to keep it on the front row for a minute, and I'll come back to the audience.
A number of people have been drawing a distinction between the media and journalism. I think Raymond mentioned it this morning, and claiming that we should be saving journalism and not newspapers, for example. But I think you need to pose the question is, does financial journalism as a set of practices, as a position of power, as Dean, I think, is intimating here, and as a resource base, does that exist without the media institutions that have supported it? Can financial journalism effectively perform the role that it has had in the past without that kind of fourth estate power base behind it? And I think the answer is I'm not at all clear that it can, and I don't think we've found the answer to how to fill in those issues yet. You can't guarantee an audience the way you once could. The power base is simply not there, and it's not just about resources. So it's not just about paying the journalist to do the story, but I think in this relationship between the Bloombergs, the Reuters, and the traditional media, and I think we are seeing a separation there. I think that there are some really fundamental issues which we haven't really grappled with, but which have come up in the discussion beforehand. And you can think about it in terms of quality of information, points made about information which is material but private coming to the market. If that information is now being concentrated on the subscription platforms, the Bloombergs, the Reuters, if they're the only people that can afford to develop that information and have the weight to publish it without falling foul of all kinds of suits from those people who want to stop that information coming to the market, which is what chills blogs after all. If that power is really being concentrated in subscription platforms, I think we need to come to terms with what that means and whether anything that we can call financial journalism exists which unifies what the mainstream media are doing, recycling a lot of that information, and what the subscription platforms are doing.
I'll keep it on the top panel for just another minute. Wolfgang, and then there are many people who want to ask a few questions.
I just wanted to say, I think fact-checking is not a problem. I mean, Bloomberg, of course, Bloomberg wrote a huge news organization. They're thriving in the current. And I think what the newspapers, and I agree, Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, they will do well. You know, sports newspapers will do well in future as well. I've noticed this because of their specialist nature as well. But the problem that I see is not so much fact-checking that's done in newspapers. Some of the blogs are very good at that. The problem that I see is the very long investigative type of piece, where a newspaper has produced lots of resources, like a team of 5 or 6 people, to investigate something, often over a period of a year, because not constantly, but sort of over long periods of time. That's something that bloggers and some of the alternative business models cannot provide.
Yeah, we basically agree.
Something that Bloomberg cannot and doesn't do, because it's not what Bloomberg does. And so basically you create a hole, and the newspapers that are most in trouble are those that don't do any new investigations. I mean, there are lots of newspapers that don't investigate.
Right.
In many countries, investigative functions are left to weekly magazines or monthly magazines or specialist publications, so that those newspapers that produce news and commentary, those sort of simple functions, they're the ones in real danger. But I think there is a public case and public issue here that the lack of investigative journalism is a threat, and that we have no answer how to deal with that problem yet.
Our resident blogger here, who I wouldn't normally voluntarily give the microphone to, but I'm going to do it in this case.
Okay, I'm actually still baffled. I mean, Mr. Munchau, I'm glad to hear from you. Actually, I also have to say FT Alphaville has great stories, and I actually wonder why you're hiding them in the blog section and not moving them forward. I mean,
I said I'm not speaking for the FT or about the FT, and so I'm just giving my.
Excuse me, I do, because because I read this very regularly, and I have contact with Isabella Kaminska, who does what you say. But what I actually see for the future, we are all clear here that the media industry is shrinking, meaning less staff, meaning less investigation. And this is where I say there should be a symbiosis between bloggers and the commercial media, because bloggers are actually the pundits, who dug in